the other one is how quickly you can make a difference here. You don't have to wait until you're in your 50s to finally get tabbed to be a leader. The Young Leaders of Northeast Indiana, I think, is one of those groups that has shown that there's plenty of room for anybody who wants a seat at the table to come in and influence whatever nonprofit that is. There's more work than there are workers.
Thank you for tuning in to the Rescue Mission podcast. This is your host, Jay, and I've got Blake here with me and Matt. Today we're interviewing Dirk Rowley. You may know the name from Wane 15. He's been serving as an evening anchor since August of 2018. Today we're talking about community involvement. One thing I thought was interesting while reading Dirk's bio on Wane.com was prior to joining Wane 15, Dirk hosted and produced a daily half-hour TV talk show which featured leaders of government, business, and nonprofit groups. During those 4 years, Dirk interviewed nearly 1% of the population of Northeast Indiana. Few jobs offer the chance to engage 4 different groups a day, roughly 1,000 a year, to learn about how they are making a difference. Dirk spent 4 years in listening mode, interviewing roughly 4,000 groups. Dirk, how are you today, sir?
I'm good. Good to be here.
We're excited to have you on the show. Thanks to Blake for getting you on here.
Yeah, happy I was able to.
We want to talk about community involvement today and the importance of being involved in the community. And Dirk, I just want to ask first off, you're involved with the Rescue Mission. You come out and do our spring gala and you emceed for the fall banquet. What was it about the Rescue Mission that made you want to get involved with that?
It's a good question because I'm trying to come up with the answer myself. Part of that was back when I was hosting that show, Donovan and then Richard at that time, who was kind of corporate development and that sort of thing, came on. And somehow through that, I'd known not Donovan before. I'd known Richard before, actually. But they asked me to kind of be the face for a night without, what is it? A night without a home?
Yep.
Okay.
Where, folks camp out, raise money there in the lawn at Kara's house. And so that, I think, kind of deepened my involvement. And I'm trying to remember if I hosted anything before that or after. I know after that, obviously, but I'm trying to remember if that was the initial kind of deep dive with the Rescue Mission.
Yeah, Donovan makes friends and then has those friends help him in a lot of ways.
Well, exactly.
That's why we love him.
Yeah. So you take a phone call from Donovan in August. Hey, would you be interested in kind of helping us out here, this thing we do later on in the year? And you're like, sure. And then all of a sudden you're laying in a tent and it's
right.
24 degrees and there's frost, as you breathe out inside your tent. And that event, though, just taught me that I felt like sometimes, we're quick to judge the behavior of homeless people and, those that are trying to find jobs and all of that. And sometimes just lack of sleep could explain, some of the behavior that we look at as maybe unusual. Because that was not a good night's sleep. And I knew I was only doing it for one night. I wasn't trying to pretend or play. I mean, that's the spirit of it. You really just want to experience it so you feel like you understand a little bit better about what's going on. And that night was just so eye-opening because it was we were welcome where we were. We weren't hiding in our campsite. We knew we were going to get a hot meal the next day. And we knew it was temporary and that it was still miserable. And it's like, what would it be like to face this nonstop day after day after day, and then try to, use those kind of lucid waking moments where hopefully you make enough sense that you can go apply for a job. It felt impossible.
Right. Well, let me just jump in there, because one of the things that I wanted to see right off the bat was if we could sort of come up with what is community involved? What is that? Because it's a nice nebulous term that, tons of different things come under. But I think you just kind of explained it by anecdote that it's becoming immersed in something that happens to our community that many people might not know about, that take some intentionality about, some of us going into that, maybe not even a deep dive, but just a cursory look at.
Sure. Because I think so many times, hopefully, everybody's willing to at least explore things that they might be interested in that they don't know about. It's how, you have that kind of civic infrastructure where Fort Wayne, I think, is really good. We've got so many nonprofits, and they span, obviously from religious-based to secular and every kind of mix in between. So there's literally, there is something for everyone. If they want to make Fort Wayne better, they can find a way to do that. And it's just being open and going and learning. Sometimes it is just attending a banquet. I know there's groups that I had no idea about what they did, what their mission was. And just by knowing, going through that banquet and hearing them present, I came away with such a deeper understanding that later I was able to say, hey, can I connect you to so-and-so because I think your missions align. And so, yeah, just learning that. So it may not even be at the level of, being immersed, but just being acquainted with sometimes is a benefit, I think, to nonprofits and helps the community.
Yeah, and that immersion and continuously getting involved with a local nonprofit can change the trajectory of your life as it has for you. You talked about you agreed to that first event, doing One Night Without a Home. I remember for me, I got connected with the rescue mission just because I started volunteering in chapel services, and I think it's entirely different, and it's a great thing to give financially to local nonprofits. But when you go there and you get your feet on the ground and you pay attention to where your feet are and you see what they're doing, it really can change your perspective about what really is going on there. I mean, I was volunteering here for about a year and then realized, man, they're really doing incredible things here. I would love to work here. And here we are a few years later kind of fulfilling that. And it's all because, we took that initial step of faith out into seeing, what was going on at this local nonprofit.
I think that's a big part of it when it comes to community involvement, just taking that step. I think a lot of people get nervous because they're like, ooh, they don't need my help, or I couldn't be of any assistance to them, or fill in the blank kind of thing. And I think so often it's just taking that step and saying, hey, I'm going to go spend one day a month at XYQZ and really try to do what I can to help them and learn about them. Honestly, I want to go back to Dirk, you kind of getting involved with the rescue mission, because something that I remember from you is when we were at the gala last year, you were one of the MCs, and Todd's story that we told and the impact it had on you. And it really impacted me then, seeing how much it impacted you, being kind of an outsider, being affected by that story, but then seeing how your involvement is helping let people know about that story. I'd love to hear more about, how that made you feel.
When you say my reaction, did I cry? Because that's usually my reaction to everything.
You got teary-eyed.
Yeah, that's, I mean, as much as I'd like to say that was unique, it probably wasn't.
You got a lot of feelings.
Yeah, well, I don't. I'm weirdly detached. Like, if you ask me, if I'm working on a story or things like that, I'm strangely detached. But there's a couple things that will almost always get me. One is spontaneous joy. Literally, when somebody freaks out on The Price is Right because they just won, that will make me tear up. I don't know why, but it is just this weird spontaneous joy. And then again, almost every redemption story just absolutely floors me, especially in a context like this where there's it's through the work of Jesus. It's hard not to be overwhelmed and be reminded of those of us who believe what we have gained through no works of our own.
Yeah, I think that's powerful to view stories of redemption differently when we realize that we are all part of a story of redemption. As you think about these different experiences with community involvement, how has this community involvement impacted your life?
With the rescue mission specifically? Or broadly?
Just broadly in Fort Wayne and throughout your life.
I mean, certainly in Fort Wayne, it helps, professionally, that I think I'm acquainted with a number of nonprofits. And I mean, I probably say that, and I'm way overestimating how many nonprofits I'm aware of. I mean, supposedly I've heard it like 100,000 or something like that, some crazy number. I don't know if that's true. I mean, that's probably me.
Oh my!
I haven't really had enough coffee yet, so that may not be right. But it's a huge number of nonprofits, and somehow they all manage to kind of stay in their lane and not overlap. I think in this, I don't know if you want to call it a sector, but in the homeless sector, I think you all work very well with the other nonprofits in town that have kind of different aims of serving homeless population, whatever that is. And so that's that's one thing that I think is good just professionally that I know. But as far as my heart goes, I usually carry a gift card to whatever, McDonald's, Wendy's, something downtown, so that if I'm stopped, because I literally had no idea what to do when you're stopped by a homeless person, I don't want to say nothing. A lot of times I'm like, hey, have you just gone to the rescue mission? Well, yeah, but then they usually get a line back. All right, well, here, I don't want to give them cash, but I want to give them something. And so that's, if you want to just look at a material point to it thing that has changed, is since I've learned more through kind of being adjacent to the rescue mission, it's that I literally have that going in my wallet with me all the time.
What advice would you give to someone that's interested in getting involved in their community? If they listen to this episode and they kind of see the importance of getting involved in their community, but they didn't know where to start, what kind of advice would you give to them?
I would say go. I mean, it's easy for me to say, I guess, maybe because I get asked, but a lot of times, just go to the banquet. If you get asked, if your work has a table, or you've got a friend that has a table, and you're like, oh, they're just going to ask me for money. Okay, maybe, but sometimes it's just go learn. I guarantee you, there's not a nonprofit in town that would say, all right, obviously 100% across the board, you don't want this, but there's obviously a built-in population where it's a fundraiser. It's not just a fundraiser. And if I can make you learn about the event or the nonprofit, so just go learn. And you may be surprised that, oh, this is really something that my values and mission aligns with completely. Maybe it's only partially, maybe it's not at all, but then and you can, and further their mission by talking to somebody else. You're going to meet somebody who's interested in that. I mean, there's so many great avenues, so many great nonprofits doing so many great things, that there's something to do. I mean, it's just who doesn't want to be busy? Just go do something.
Yeah.
Just go.
I think you said a fundraiser is something I've realized in Fort Wayne, because I started out my career in Columbus, Ohio, then came to Indianapolis, and then moved to Fort Wayne with my wife when we got married. And there's a lot of connections here in Fort Wayne. So many people that they always say, you're 3 people away from anyone in the world. I feel like in Fort Wayne, you're 1 person away.
Right.
And it's a small town feel in a big city. And you're exactly right. Just going to those things, meeting people, kind of networking is such a positive thing within the community, because then even if, like you said, that nonprofit isn't for you, someone there can probably connect you to another one, or you'll find, or you'll hear of something that you're interested in, and you could go down that avenue. There's just so many connections and so many things that people in the Fort Wayne area are so giving, honestly.
One of the things they tout as far as moving to Fort Wayne is, cost of living, which may or may not be a great thing, honestly, when it all adds up, but it's an appeal, and it's a fact of life. But the other one is how quickly you can make a difference here. Mm-hmm. You don't have to wait until you're in your 50s to finally get tabbed to be a leader. The Young Leaders of Northeast Indiana, I think, is one of those groups that has shown that there's plenty of room for anybody who wants a seat at the table to come in and influence whatever nonprofit that is. Mm-hmm. There's more work than there are workers. So again, you can be a part of this almost right away. And even if it's just as a volunteer and not as a board member or paid staffer, there is so much opportunity. And that's, I think, like you said, it's a big city, small town. There's so many things going on, and yet there's so many places to get plugged in. I mean, there's just no excuse if you're like, I don't know what to do. You're not looking. If you're honestly ever saying that.
When I don't think there's any nonprofit or group that's doing work here in our city or any city who doesn't want you to know their story.
Right.
And if you know their story, then that is one step towards caring, of giving a moment of your time to learn something about. And if you don't, I have a mother-in-law who is constantly saying, I saw this in the paper. I met this person who told me about their ministry, or I did this. She's passing everything on, right? And it sounds like it sounds a little bit like you became a bridge as well between, I know how these things are connected. I see the vascular system of our city and how it works.
Yeah, the one thing that the biggest fear I have, I guess, for Fort Wayne and the connectivity part is it does feel like the nonprofits feel a bit siloed based on evangelicals versus Catholics versus Lutherans versus secular. Like it feels like there's almost not enough crossover. And I'd love to see one day, I don't know, ecumenical banquets, something like, could we learn more about both? Could we learn more about, the group that is doing work on a Catholic side and on an evangelical side and on a Lutheran side? Because it feels like there's slight redundancies, not necessarily their efforts, but in their mission. And how are they teaming up? Because it is interesting which crowd you walk into, which fundraiser you walk into. You're like, oh, this must be a blank event, because you can almost tell based on who's there, the last names. Oh, this is a Lutheran event. This is a Catholic event. This is evangelical. Whatever that is, and it'd be great if somehow all those organizations could say, let's introduce your audience to our work, and vice versa. Let's introduce our work to your audience. I think that'd be great.
It's interesting you say that, because a couple episodes we were talking about our community resource center, which is on our first floor, and that was kind of one of its goals, bringing in organizations that can provide services to those that we serve that maybe wouldn't have normally been in our wheelhouse of, hey, we're going to reach out to them. And that was purely just because we saw a need where the individuals we serve couldn't travel around the city and get the services they need. So instead, if we brought the services all in-house into our community resource center, it just opened up a plethora of opportunities for them. So we kind of use that as a case study, and we're still working through exactly what it can look like in that community resource center. But I think something like that is definitely a possibility for it to go towards.
Yeah, I think it's a powerful statement about community involvement, just with the different denominations and expressions of the faith. And this may be off topic, but Matt, I'd be curious to hear from you, because I know Prayer Works is one in the community that's gotten several different denominations on board. How it's so important to have that unity, because we see how I used to work in emergency services down here at the Rescue Mission, and it's so much easier when you're united with other organizations and you can utilize that unity to serve the individuals that it's our mission to serve. Let's just use kind of an example, like how did Prayer Works get that kind of unity?
Well, it's one of those things of what came first, the chicken or the egg. What came first, the idea for unity, or did the idea for this project come up, and all of a sudden we saw that what it was grabbing for was unity, right? And to sort of twist that around and grab you guys into this from your perspective, this is what, like, in my wheelhouse, I'm a connector. I want to know everybody in the room, and I want to see how they can all play in the same sandbox together. From your perspective, what did you say? 4,000 different interviews that you've done about community involvement. What do you suspect unity would look like?
Well, I think Prayer Works is a great example.
Yeah. I didn't really describe it at all.
but again, I know that when Chris Norman, who kind of was the driving force behind a lot of that, reached out to some in the Catholic community, and they were asking, can we pray like the Rosary? And they thought, you know what, we're going to put that aside, because we have our own space for that. We're going to find out what unites us, and that's the way we're going to pray when we're at Prayer Works, which I thought was a tremendous step towards unity. I mean, it's again, what unites us? What do we have in common? Where can we help? And so that's an interesting thing. But again, I forget what your question was. But I think Prayer Works is an interesting case study, perhaps, as to what can be done, where you've got literally not just churches and nonprofits that are staffing that 24/7, but you've got businesses that are coming in that are saying, you know what, if there's somebody here in our workforce that wants to go join us to pray, we're going to let you out of work to go do that. Right. And these aren't Christian companies. These are companies that will let their people express their Christian faith.
Yeah, not to go down a tangent, but it's almost like paying attention to spiritual wellness.
Right.
Right? Companies would pay attention to physical wellness. We'll give you X amount of time to go for a walk at lunch, or, record this healthy meal plan, or whatever it might be. But you're giving somebody the option to invest in their spiritual life, or invest in less tangible things that have greater effect. And I think so the question that I have that's really interesting to me is always like what could be, right? So if we have the beginnings of all of these rumblings, and I think I saw Grace Gathering, so Chris Norman and St. Vincent are having
have a church service plan together.
they're having a joint worship service together. Right? That would have never happened had somebody not just stepped out a little bit and said, "Okay, well, let's be involved in that and let's do that." So I wonder what the next sort of phase of community involvement in Fort Wayne might look like, and to dream about that.
I'd like to go back and ask you two, because you've been in the working industry longer than Jay and I, and the word spiritual wellness. Could you have imagined that in the 90s or even the early 2000s being something that not only we're talking about from a secular standpoint, when you were saying that businesses that aren't even Christian businesses are more focused on, hey, if you want to go to this prayer works, that'd be great. We support that. When you guys were working in the 80s and the 90s, do you think that ever would have been like a topic or a concern? It's more of an interest thing, because the way things have changed in the last even 10 years for self-help, and COVID, I think, really brought to light a lot of those issues that the workforce had just dealt with for decades upon decades. And I'd be interested to hear if you guys think that's a huge breakthrough or if it's caused just as much harm as it has good.
Well, I mean, I'll jump in only, I've worked in churches. So obviously I'm seeing this secondarily, with parishioners and knowing the challenges that they might have. But I think one of the things that has become very acceptable all across the board is, everybody in the social media world has, it's my birthday, I'm doing this fundraiser for X, or, hey, I gave to this and I want to post about it. Everybody has something that is their bailiwick, right?
Bailiwick.
Yeah,
That's
I
a
know,
new-
right?
That's a new
nice.
term.
It's a word. It's a thing.
Hey, Google, define bailiwick.
Term of the day.
Term of the day, right? Word of the day. Yeah. What?
Oh, it did.
It did.
My phone is literally answering. No, quiet.
What does it say?
That was rhetorical.
What does it say?
I don't. Well, see, now I have to look it all up again. So anyway,
man.
sorry, I turned it off.
No,
Yeah.
it's okay.
Good.
I would love to hear what
great.
Google says about bailiwick. But I'm wondering how that translates into the workplace now, where it's okay to have your thing, right? It's okay to know that Matt's the prayer works guy, so go talk to him, or so and so is involved with St. Mary's. We have one of the guys that we want to grab on to have their story told on a Friday is works over at St. Mary's Soup Kitchen and is very involved there. And we want to hear, like, what does it look like to be over there, to be feeding people when you have the rescue mission over here that we know they give 3 meals a day. So who goes there, and how can we help them, and how can we become a little bit more, part of? We've talked about this from the beginning of the podcast of how to be a part of the fabric of Fort Wayne. What does it look like for us to be pieces of a whole, I guess.
Because I think, again, it goes back to everything is interconnected, whether you want it to be or not. It is. And I think most people want it to be. And I think that's the interesting part about Fort Wayne is that there's still largely a Christian consensus. I don't think that, if people talk, detractors will say, oh, it's like the 50s here or whatever. And in many ways it is. And there's things we need to work on to be more progressive, I would argue. But there's a lot of things that kind of, speaking as a Christian, are good about Fort Wayne, and the fact that we share that Christian consensus largely, I think it lets people, going back to spiritual health, employees have a spiritual life, I think is almost a given at every company that has employees in Fort Wayne. I think almost any boss would recognize that and appreciate that, or at least work with it, accommodate that at the minimum. And I think that's just a given.
Yeah, and one thing I keep hearing that we keep coming back to is it sounds like when we step out of our comfort zone a little bit with community involvement, thinking about, Grace Gathering and St. Vincent's having a service together, or simply going out. You may have a nonprofit that you're involved with, and you may be intrigued by one that you're not involved with, and you may think, well, I'm involved with this one, and so I shouldn't be involved with that one. And that's not to say that you should try to run around and get connected with every nonprofit in Fort Wayne. But I think one thing that we can kind of do, going back to that question, talking about how you get started with community involvement, as we've talked about the importance of this, and from a Christian perspective, is just asking, God, how can I be more involved in my community? Would you show me the right places where my gifts and my calling can be used to serve others well, so that we're just not letting a Google search decide where we're going to go serve and give our time, but allowing our faith to be the engine and the arrow to point to where we're going with that.
Don't say, "Hey Google," again.
Okay, I won't say that again.
Oh dear.
As he's covering his phone.
It hasn't said anything yet, so I think you're okay.
Well, Dirk, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast today and talking about community involvement. Matt, I know you always like to ask the big question, and so I'll let you ask your final question that we usually ask.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
So the final question is, what can I do, big or small, today to be more involved in our community?
I guess one would be pay attention to not only what people are doing around you, but then what it is inside of you that feels like you need to connect with, or you need to express, or you need to do next. I mean, that's generally, it's not I'm studying Jeremiah, who had 40 years of prophecy and had like 2 success stories, if you want to go that way, conversions. I mean, 40 years, 2 people.
Not a great success rate.
Right, exactly. So it's sometimes it's not even the measurement. It's just be faithful to God, do the next right thing, and that will hopefully lead you towards, I assume, one of these nonprofits. And it may be a secular nonprofit. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think helping the city, helping people, these human services organizations, you're still serving your fellow man, which I think is ultimately a large part of what we're called to do.
Yeah, I think if I can tease out one of the things that we've said this whole time is just do something, right? And you said earlier, and I don't want it to pass by, that there's more than enough work,
Right.
right? There's not going to be a whole lot of people standing in line waiting for something to need their hands. And I think one of the things that I would love to see from nonprofits is more of the we're in the same sandbox, and more of the let's if we can't do it, let me tell you about some friends of ours across the town who are doing it, and they really do need a hand. So in that sense, I think invitation becomes a giant issue here. It's not just somebody finding out about a NGO or NGO. Do we use that on humans on U.S. soil, or is that somewhere else?
I knew what you meant.
Yeah, I know what you meant too.
Right? Non-governmental organization. But it's not just somebody like Googling what the rescue mission is, or finding out who is doing X across town, but it's those places making good invitations to say, why don't you come on in and learn about us and take a tour. You can always come here and take a tour. You could always call those ministries, and I'm sure they would love to tell you their stories.
And no gift is too big or small.
And no gift is too big or small.
We can be talking about gift of time, gift of things. So if you're giving in kind to organizations where you're giving them things that you have, or, an actual gift of, money or monetary donation. And so many people think, well, my gift won't help. My gift won't help. But if you give a gift of $5 and another 500 people do as well, that's a big gift. So it turns into, so often people convince themselves like, my amount of help won't help, so I just won't help. And it's like, no, any amount of gift, even if you can only give 2 hours in a month, that's better than nothing. And you're doing your part to try to get involved.
$2.59 will provide somebody with a meal and hope at the rescue mission. So Dirk, thank you for coming on the podcast today and sharing with us. I'm really taking along with me the fact of paying attention. I think that really is the key to community involvement. right there is paying attention to where you are, paying attention to what's around you, whether it be somebody on the streets that's in need of a meal, referring them to the rescue mission or giving them a gift card, or paying attention to nonprofits in your neighborhood that may need local assistance. When it comes to community involvement, what is the importance? The importance is paying attention and helping serve one another in your community. Thanks for coming on, Dirk.
Thanks, Dirk.
Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Rescue Mission Podcast, we ask you to consider leaving a review, subscribing, following whatever platform you're on. We'd love to have you keep up with us and what's going on with the Rescue Mission Podcast. Thanks for listening.